Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. On the show today, we're joined by Annalee Kruger, who is the president of CareRight. This is a consultancy that provides corporate training as well as consulting services for organizations wanting to learn more about aging, family caregiving, dementia care, end-of-life care, as well as direct-to-family caregivers who are realizing caregiving without a plan is not a safe nor sustainable practice. Annalee has spent the last 3 decades helping over 20,000 families negotiate the emotional, the financial, the logistical complexities of aging, caregiving, dementia, and long-term care planning. She's also the co-founder of a group called Plan for Life. They are home of the Certified Elder Planning Specialist program. They train and credential folks and equip financial advisors to better serve aging clients. She's also the creator of the Aging Strategy Coaching Academy. This is a 150-hour training and certification program for professionals that are entering the senior care consulting field. She is a keynote speaker in many forums, has delivered somewhere about 500 different live events, 2,000 or so webinars on topics from everything from aging planning, dementia care, family dynamics, and the sort of this area that we're getting today of caregiver burnout. She's also an accomplished author with her new book, The Invisible Patient, The Emotional, Financial, and Physical Toll on Family Caregivers, Practical Guide Navigating Caregiving Challenges with Clarity and Compassion, available on all major booksellers. She did her bachelor's degree in social work, University of Northern Iowa, went on to an MBA from Cardinal Stritch University in Wisconsin, and we're honored to have with us. Looking forward to getting into many themes today. Annalee Kruger, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. And that was a really well done intro. I should always have you do mine. Like, wow, that was really well done.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And, again, lots of different themes that we're going to get into today. And, each one is equally interesting. So, but before you do any of that, Annalee, I would really love to start off really on two fronts. One, if you could just share a little bit about you, your background, what led you into the world of caregiving and aging services. And then second to that, and then I'll shut up. The beginning of the book, you dedicate to your mother. You obviously have taken care of many people, but also your mother who was in dementia care. Can you share those experiences as well? Because I think we all have a personal experience along the way. And if you could talk about her as well, I think that's important.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. So my background is as a social worker in long-term care. And prior to starting my own consultancy, CareRight Incorporated in 2011, I worked as a social worker, admissions coordinator, and then ultimately an executive director in CCRCs, which are continuing care retirement communities that have independent living, memory care, skilled rehab, skilled nursing. So they have the entire gamut of care services. And every day for over 2 decades, I helped families who were blindsided by a medical crisis. It's usually the adult kids get this phone call that mom had a stroke. She's a caregiver to dad who has dementia. Hospital says, here's a list of facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging your mom and she has to go somewhere because insurance is saying that she's ready to be discharged from the hospital. So the kids they're coming in and they're really freaked out because stepping into a care community is pretty daunting and it's pretty intimidating. And they have no idea what questions to ask, what to look for. They have two aging parents that need two totally different types of care. Dad needs memory care, like a secured memory care unit, so he doesn't wander away. They're already overwhelmed and tired because mom had a stroke. So the kids are splitting their time between trying to advocate and keep mom company at the at the hospital, but also having to take care of dad who needs 24/7 care, and which is usually why the primary caregiver had a stroke in the first place. So no one should ever be surprised by that. But these kids would come in every day and just shell shocked, like their eyeballs are like this big because they're like, "Oh my gosh, we got the news that we're supposed to find a place. We don't know what to do." And so they were so scared and overwhelmed and just really anxiety ridden. And so I would spend 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family. Like the kids would, they're like, memory care is the same as nursing home, right? Like they have no idea about the differences in care levels. Most families assume that Medicare or some other payer source is going to pay for all this care. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. They didn't understand dementia because they're like, how can dad not manage on his own? He used to run a bank, and we
Hmm.
just didn't realize that mom was doing all this stuff for him. And then they're like trying to understand how rehab works with Medicare and mom and her stroke and all this kind of stuff. And then when I would ask, do your parents have a living will, power of attorney? Do they have their funeral arrangements taken care of? What are their code statuses? Like when their heart stops, are they a full CPR or do not resuscitate? And the kids are like, "Oh my God, we have no idea. We have never talked about any of this stuff." But then there were like, where's the camera? There were like this many percentage of adult kids who would say, Annalee, we saw the writing on the wall. Mom's had another hospital stay, or dad wandered away from the house like 3 months ago, and we tried to put some plans and healthcare situations in place, but they gave us so much pushback that we
Hmm.
quit trying. Well, here we are again, lo and behold, in crisis mode. So I was spending all this time with these families, and I'm just like, oh, gosh, I think I have a business model here. I think I need to go out on my own. And honestly, I was going to get fired if I didn't, because I got written up again for spending too much time with the families. I was exceeding the minutes per patient per day
Hmm.
that all of these care facilities have in place. So when families are like, no one spends a lot of time with my loved one in a care facility, well, the reason is because all of these facilities have how many minutes per patient per day that you're supposed to spend with each resident, and it's like
Hmm.
this much. Okay. So so in 2011, I left corporate America because I'm like, I have a business model here. I'm pretty smart. People like me, like they develop rapport with me quickly. And so within a month, I was already at like full capacity because as soon as everybody realized I left corporate America and started my own consultancy, like my phone rang off the hook. And so so that's what started me to have my own company. So I created a business to solve for all the problems that I encountered for almost 3 decades with these families who they've never had family meetings, or if they tried to have a family meeting, it tanked because of family
Hmm.
relationships, family dynamics, and you can't expect a family to facilitate their own family meeting when they don't even understand the full realm of what's coming down the pike with dementia because they don't understand it. They're like, "Well, if dad's dementia gets worse, that tells me that they haven't been educated about that disease process."
Right.
And if they think Medicare and Medicaid are the same thing, you can't expect families to
Right.
make smart decisions or informed decisions when they're trying to make decisions off of usually crisis and knee-jerk reaction, but also misinformation. So that's why I started my consultancy. I went virtual literally right away as soon as I hung my virtual shingle, because by then, by 2011, yeah, I'm old enough to say things like that. My grandparents lived with us on the farm, so I talk like a person 30 years older than I am. I have an old soul, so I talk like that. And they're like, you have two rocking chairs in your house. I'm like, yeah, I know, just leave me alone. And so anyway, so so I started a virtual consultancy, Care Right Incorporated, in 2011 on purpose to be virtual because by 2011, families didn't live near each other. And I started my company in the Milwaukee market. And so while mom and dad lived in the Milwaukee market, the kids did not oftentimes. And so the kids were constantly flying or driving back and forth from wherever they lived every time there was a health issue with their parent or both parents. And so they're exhausted. My typical son or daughter, someone in the family is spending about $15,000 out of pocket the year
Hmm.
before they start working with us. And that's just emergency airfare. Because if you live in New York and your parent lives in Arizona and they fall or have a stroke and you have to be there tomorrow,
Yep.
airfare is not $69 on Frontier. So the
Right.
financial cost of just all this crisis mode, and these what I call rescue missions is really expensive. And then if when you have to step away from your career or your business, for a period of time, employers aren't family oriented like they used to be. So if you're not hitting your sales numbers or whatever it is your job is, because you're not there, if you're not selling houses, your
Right.
livelihood is impacted, right?
Right.
And so, so that's kind of a typical scenario with the families that come to us, and they're always in crisis mode because dementia progressed faster than they realized, or they always thought they had more time,
Yep.
or no one expected that mom was going to have a stroke, but yet she did because all the thousands of people who had a major stroke last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today, and let's just stress test our family and our finances, right? But that's what happens literally every day.
Yep.
I know this is so uplifting.
No,
This is real life. This is real life.
it's real life. I can personally vouch for it, having been there a few times myself. Um, and it's interesting, and I want to sort of drill down on each of these components. But before we go there, I would love for you to introduce this theme. I mean, the book is called The Invisible Patient, and as we've talked about this caregiving topic on previous shows. We have all these interesting terms, like we've talked on a previous episode about the sandwich generation,
Yep.
about grown children that are taking care of both their kids and their parents. Obviously, we talk about a lot about the silver tsunami. In this case, you've created this term, the invisible patient, which basically, is basically the caregiver. I mean,
Hmm.
you think of everything you're just talking about, and then you just think about all of the self-sacrifice, the fatigue, and we'll go into the spiritual, physical, emotional, and financial details and more. But talk a little bit how you created this principle of the invisible patient, because I think it's very crucial and
Yeah.
important.
Well, because all I work with are burned out financial, or well, probably burned out financial advisors too, but that's my other company. But what I work with is burned out family caregivers because no one
Hmm.
calls me because things are going well,
Right,
right? Like no one's like, "Hey, I heard this podcast. You sound pretty cool and hip."
right,
Like a 53-year-old with two rocking chairs. I sound pretty
right,
hip. Like no one calls me because things are going well. So what I like all I know is what it's like to be a burned out family caregiver because that's all I've done with my entire career and I've been one before, you know. So when I talk about the invisible patient, it's the primary caregiver. You know, everybody's always like, "Hey, how's your mom? How's your dad? Or how's your husband?" And you're always like, "Well, they're fine," but it's it's to my detriment because I'm the one bending over backwards, making sacrifices with my career, or my business, or my own health. Because what families don't realize is the caregiver snowball. It might start out feeling manageable that you can take care of your dad, and then you're like, oh my gosh, he needs more care than what I'm equipped to do. Or I'm the daughter, I don't feel comfortable taking my dad to the shower, you know? So it
right,
starts out feeling manageable, and it is manageable until it isn't, until it
right,
starts affecting your career, your life, your family, your health. And so the invisible patient is that person whose voice is rarely ever heard. And as a family caregiver, we tend to put our needs last. And so then we end up getting overwhelmed, anxious, resentful of siblings that may or may not be helping as much as they could. Or we get resentful towards the care recipient, even though it's not their fault that they're needing more care, that's just to
hmm
be expected as we age. None of us are going to get healthier, more independent, more cognizant, and more mobile as we age. So we just
hmm
have to go into this being really realistic and not have our heads in the sand. but we know that 58% of adult kids will end up thrust into the role of family caregiving because, again, they don't expect dementia to progress so quickly, or they didn't expect that their parent was going to get, have a stroke, or they didn't expect that dad was going to get T-boned on his
Right.
way home from his VA appointment. And he was trying to get home because the caregiver was leaving to go to her next client and he can't leave his demented wife home by herself, right? But these things happen all the time. So that invisible patient is any of us who is a family caregiver, and we have to put safeguards in place for family caregivers so that they don't continually get burned out and overwhelmed. We know that if the families don't have an aging plan, which is what we do aging planning. If they
Hmm.
don't have a plan, we know that the caregivers are going to only get more and more burned out, and it's preventable if we have enough supports in place. They understand the disease that they're taking care of. They have their documents, their accounts, their passwords, their funeral arrangements, all of that buttoned up. That's what we do with an aging plan.
Got it. Got it. Let's Emily, let's go a little further because you mentioned the snowball effect, and you talk about this principle of the caregiver snowball, which is made up again of all of these different challenges and these different baskets. And I think it'd be not to scare the audience any further, but I think it's
I
important to sort
know.
of drill down on some of these. And if we just look at the one, sort of the emotional one at first, and I'll give an example from my own life. We dealt with a cancer patient. We have father-in-law, father cancer, mother fell, mother-in-law dementia. Now, all of that sort of different paces, of which obviously
Mhm.
dementia and cancer and trauma it all went differently. It's sort of the initial thing, but there's sort of the funnel that they all went through as things cascaded and got bad, let's say, it happened pretty quick. So, sort of the delirium, the cachexia,
Mhm.
and the wasting, sort of the things that we don't normally think about in our daily lives. Like, oh, I don't really think of delirium. Like, what is that? But, oh, wow. And when you see it, it's scary and
Mhm.
you got to be prepared for it. Talk a little bit about this. I think this is, again, important because, people that may not have ever dealt with a sickness in the family of any type, it's significant.
It is
Not just the
significant.
initial diagnosis, but the snowballing and the snowballing emotions that come with it.
Exactly. Well, we know that there's over 60 million family caregivers just in the
Mhm.
United States, and those are just people who actually identify as a caregiver. When I'm talking to families or when I'm doing my speaking engagements, I'm like, how many of you are a caregiver? Very few people raise their hand, but I'm like, well, how many of you are missing work or taking time off work? How many are coordinating care for a loved one? How many of you are actually physically providing care? And then all of a sudden, hey, how many of you are having to talk to the financial advisor because they have to move money around to pay for care? Like all of those things are care. How many of you are setting up medications or doing wound care? And then more
Right.
and more and more hands go up. So, so there's so many of us out there in the real world. In reality, if you have aging parents or if you have a spouse or a partner, it's very likely that you're going to end up a caregiver.
Yeah.
Example, example, because I talk to families in crisis literally every day. And so, you know, spouses don't intend to get that diagnosis of breast cancer, but guess what? That they do. Or they don't intend to have that car accident. I mean, I'm 53, but 4 days after my 40th birthday, I just had returned from Shenzhen in Beijing, China, because I'm an international speaker on aging
Okay.
issues. And I was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
I was helping an elderly gentleman that I encountered on the main street of Sheboygan. He was looking like he was having some health issues. And I was like, "Do you want me to call 911?" And because he's like really red, and I'm like, "Oh, this is not good." And he's like, "No, no, I just need to get across the street because my wife is waiting for me in the car, and then we're gonna go back home." And I'm like, "Okay, thank God. You should probably detour by the ER instead." But whatever. And so I'm like, well, let me at least make sure that you get across the street. No good deed goes unpunished. And so we're waiting at the light as pedestrians. We're waiting for the light to turn where the little green legs say, okay, cool, you can go. So we're
Right.
going, and he's still telling me all about his health issues. And all of a sudden he yells, watch out. And the next thing I know is I'm getting myself up off the street.
Oof.
Yeah, and I'm like, what the heck just happened here? And so I'm getting myself up off the street. I'm like, huh, that's weird. And so I look at the street and there's all this broken glass and reflectors, and I'm like, that wasn't just there. And so then I look up further and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I got hit by a school bus because the bus was parked crooked across the street. And sure enough, I did. She was distracted by the kids on the bus. She was looking inside that inside mirror instead of through the windshield, and she blew through a four-corner stop. She didn't apply the brakes until she saw my face break the headlight of the school bus.
Mm,
So, thankfully, I always carry way too big of a bag, but I carry a backpack is what I had for my purse, and I carry way too much stuff in it. But that is actually what saved me from having any kind of brain bleed or head contusion
mhm.
because I kind of turtled. You know, it prevented me from hitting my head on the curb. And so thankfully, it was me that got hit and not this elderly gentleman because it totally would have killed him, right?
Yeah,
And so my point in sharing this is like I didn't wake up on May 3rd of 2012 going, huh, I think I'm going to get hit by a school bus today and really have my life blow up in front of me for almost a year. But that happened. But because I do what I do for a living, I'm prepared. I have my grab and go binder. I carry my living will. Like if there's
right,
anything that you take from this podcast,
right.
carry your living will with you or have it in your glove box or in your travel bag. Carry your power of attorney for health care. If you already have your DNR, your do not resuscitate, have that with you. Like you have to be, an adult about these things because no one ever expects to have a major accident. If I would have lost capacity and consciousness and didn't have my documents with me, they would have no idea what to do, and I would end up with all sorts of tubes and stuff that I absolutely do not want. And so we all have to, we all get kind of thrust into life has its own agenda.
Yeah.
So I couldn't take care of myself because I had broken ribs and obviously a broken face because a bus just tried to drive through it. Internal bleeding. I mean, I was kind of a mess, right? So because I'm single, I needed care. And so I ended up having to move back in with my parents on the farm for a few months because I needed all this reconstruction surgery and all this kind of stuff. So I was the one that needed the care. But the blessing in this story is that because I was with my parents nonstop for months, it was very apparent my mom had early onset dementia. So she would say things that what would be for more for people who could chew would be
Hmm.
breakfast. I was on a liquid diet for like 8 months. Not the best way to lose weight, but it does work. So I had a broken face. And so I was on a liquid diet. And so whatever she would kind of say at like breakfast or in the morning, she would repeat, in the early afternoon. And I'm like, oh no. Here we are in the dementia journey. So she had early onset dementia. That's actually one of the reasons why I also went virtual, not only because the market had changed and families don't live near each other, but because I knew that I wanted to be actively involved with my own aging parents as they aged.
Hmm. Hmm. Very
And
important points.
and I'm a typical statistic too. I live in Florida now. I live in Florida. My parents would come down from Iowa for the winters. 2 weeks after my mom and dad came down a few years ago, 2 weeks after they got here, she fell. Her leg buckled and she fell. She fell against my washing machine. She broke her shoulder. The ER didn't catch the break. So they're like, oh, she's fine. And they sent her back home. She was
Mm.
not fine. She had a broken shoulder. And so that progressed her dementia literally overnight, which
Yep.
is typical. Like
Yep.
anytime there's trauma, emotional or physical trauma to a dementia patient, that will usually trigger them literally overnight into that next stage. And then 2 weeks, so she was in the hospital for 2 weeks trying to get pain management, and hospitals just simply are not trained in dementia care either. So my dad was there in the morning. I would come over afternoon and spend all night with her because if she didn't have someone with her, she was scared all the time, right?
Yeah.
2 weeks later, the night that they're admitting my mom into skilled rehab, I look over, my dad and I are I'm trying to get mom situated in rehab because they discharged her at like 9 o'clock at night. And so I look over to my dad and I'm like, hey, dad, we need to get, it was around Christmas time. So I'm like, dad, we need to get mom's room ready for Christmas and stuff like that. He wasn't responding. So when I looked at him, he was having a stroke.
Ugh,
So this is a typical scenario for adult kids. And so then so I have my mom who's like in a totally foreign place to her. She's scared, she's calling out for help. I got my dad who's unresponsive. At that very moment, the nurse comes in and she's like, "You got to get out of here because we got to do your mom's skin assessment." And I'm like, "My dad is having a stroke. He's unresponsive." And she's like, "That doesn't matter. You need to get out. You need to go in the hallway because," and I was just like, "Oh my this is like typical senior care. This is a very typical example of what it's like in senior care."
yeah,
And so that's how things can propel and progress really quickly out of control. And it's overwhelming when you don't have enough supports in place and a plan.
yeah. I mean, have a plan, and at the same time, as you mentioned, the whole issue about advocating, and we saw the same thing, and not as much from the trauma to dementia, but the whole sort of dementia delirium balance, because that's another one that's
Yeah.
we don't. And I'm sorry I bring that up a lot because it's one of those that sort of bothers me that I've seen where it's sort of dementia's ugly twin sister, not that dementia's ugly enough, but
Yeah.
delirium, it's its own thing, sort of majorly undiagnosed. But I appreciate a lot of what you're saying, and in sort of this self-advocating requirement and sort of being prepared, because as you're showing here, life is what happens when you're making the other plans. And so, I mean, these things happen and they come fast and furious. And yeah, I mean, you have to have a
And
plan.
you do have to have a plan. And we have, because I do what I do for a living. So, of course, we have aging plans in place for my parents. And so it's not like when I had to call my siblings and that they were like, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" We already knew what we were going to do
Correct.
because I do what I do for a living. So we already had their living will, power of attorney. We already had all those documents in order. But where my own family, where I messed up with my own family is because they were just coming down to visit, right? Um, and then they both needed care.
Yeah.
And so, so where I made a mistake with my own family is then I was scrambling because care facilities needed payment. And so we had to open up a Wells Fargo account down here.
Yeah.
My brother, who's the well, he and I are both the financial power of attorney, but I kind of had my hands full with both of our parents. So we had to open up another Wells Fargo account and put my mom and dad on it. And my brother had to transfer money because the care facility needed payment, right? So
Hmm.
and I'm just like, God, I can't believe I had everything else buttoned up, but I missed that one thing. So, things just spiral out of control really, really quickly. But one thing I do want to say too because I think that we need to spend a minute on the delirium piece because this is
Yeah.
the other thing. And if this saves one life, we
Yeah.
did a beautiful thing then just in this podcast. But I can share with you, most people do not understand urinary tract infections.
Yep.
And you can
Yep.
actually go septic and die from an untreated urinary tract infection. So I feel like it's worth taking one minute
Yeah.
to talk about a urinary tract infection because even with my own newsletters that I send out to my database, my urinary tract infection newsletter had a 76% open rate because everybody's like, "Oh, I had no idea about all this." And so when we talk about a urinary tract infection, with an elderly person, they don't have the same symptoms that we do when we're younger. They don't have the burning, upon urination sometimes like we do when we're younger. But
Yeah.
when an older person has a urinary tract infection, they can be lethargic, so they have no energy. They can almost, or they conversely, they can be like so hyper that they're wandering and pacing and they're just like on the go all the time, especially if they have dementia. But they also have frequency of urination. So they're like, oh, and trying to always go to the bathroom or look for the
Yep.
bathroom if they have dementia. Falls, if they start having like more and more falls, like two or three falls now, and you're like, gosh, they don't usually fall, that can be an indication of a urinary tract infection as well. So, anytime there's a change in their mood, significant change in their mood, behavior, personality, energy level, attention span, ability to communicate, and it's had kind of a sudden onset. That is probably a urinary tract infection. So the doctor needs to be notified, get the urine sample, get it to the lab, and it's usually 9 times out of 10 a
Yep.
UTI. But it's treatable, but you need to catch it early because otherwise they can go septic and die. Too many seniors die from a UTI and it could have been prevented.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, you're reading my mom. I mean, this is exactly what happened to my mother-in-law. I mean, she didn't go septic, but it took her down the wrong. Let's just say
Hmm.
it went down the wrong path. And what you're saying, and again, for everyone listening, is spot on because again, another case of how little things can, in this particular area, can steamroll out of control, and you really need to be prepared. So I appreciate you bringing that up. You
Yeah.
know, you brought up the topic of your siblings. Now, I don't know how things were in your family, but one of the things I can attest to is in our discussions with other families, it seemed more often than not there was usually a sibling that was doing most of the work. And this, it was obviously it's a physical because we're going to sort of look at the physical challenge, of course, that okay, if there's four of you and one of you is doing the work, that's tough. But at the same time, there's I'll bring a sort of a spiritual component here. You're like, hey, there's these three siblings over here that which I love dearly, but all of a sudden I really hate them because they're not helping out at this
Yeah.
really crucial point. Look, talk about this because and any solutions because I mean I think there's a lot of
Yes.
people out there that have been in that boat. We were in that boat. Um,
Oh,
we have friends that are in that boat. So think
seriously,
about
almost every family is almost every family ends up in that boat. And so,
yeah.
so with my scenario with my mom who fell, broke her shoulder, and then dementia progressed like literally overnight, and then my dad had his stroke. Um, 2 weeks after that is when the pandemic hit and the whole world shut down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so normally my siblings would have been able to fly down and help me, and normally we would be able to work as a team and they would have been able to be here and supportive and help in some way. But because of the pandemic, there wasn't much that they could do other than be like, "Hey, we're thinking about you. What can we
Yeah.
do to help you?" And so, but they can't be there to advocate for my parents. That's all on me. And so what happens usually is because families get thrust into caregiving, they've never had any of these family meetings and put an aging plan in place for the what whens of aging, not the what ifs, but the what whens. And so when an adult kid gets thrust into caregiving, they just kind of assume that their siblings are going to help out. They're like, huh, there's four of us, we can probably handle this, we'll tag team mom or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't always work out that way because what if your sibling maybe she's the caregiver to a husband who has cancer or MS or something, or maybe this one has a special needs child and not just anyone can babysit him, right? Or this one never got along, he's the black sheep of the family. So there's always family dynamics, but I can promise you that 92% of our families, and it's always the adult kids who reach out to us because well, they've become mom and dad's assisted living and they're not
Yep.
comfortable with it and realized it's safe or sustainable. And so 85% of those families, I'm doing family mediation because by the time they come to us, they're not getting along. Maybe they
Mm.
never got along, or maybe it's a blended family and they didn't even know each other until Ethel and Marvin got married in their 80s. And now the kids are like, oh, I guess you're my brother, whatever. And so there's always family dynamics. So maybe they never got along in the first place, or maybe they used to get along, but now because of, how should an inheritance be spent? Or dad's not as bad as you say he is. Because when I call
Yep.
him every 2 weeks for that 10-minute phone call, he seems fine. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's totally not fine. So that's how relationship wedges can like get in the middle of a relationship is nobody understands dementia. So they're like, he's fine. You're just blowing it all out of proportion. And then the next thing you know, you're getting the call from the police department because they found him wandering across a major street, right?
Right.
And then the sister's like, I told you guys. And so, or, there's like, oh, well, we don't, dad's doing fine. We don't need to put in care because that's going to cost money. And then that's that much less inheritance we have. Or,
Right.
there's all sorts of like things that families bring to the table. And that's why when I'm doing mediation, which is again about 85% of my week is spent doing family meetings and family mediation so that we can put a now crisis plan in place. But before we can put that plan in place, they actually have to understand all this stuff so then they can make informed decisions, right? So first education, then
Mm-hmm.
informed decisions, and then act. So that's kind of that process. But I've yet to work with a family who actually got along and worked as a team.
Mm-hmm.
If I could reach these families proactively when they're starting to see the writing on the wall with mom and dad, and they're still actually getting along, that's really
Hmm.
the best time to put a plan in place because you're still getting along. You're not in crisis. So those family meetings aren't going to be like, people in each other's throats. And they have the emotional capacity to understand and comprehend versus no emotional bandwidth when you've got two aging parents and they need two different kinds of care and you're overwhelmed.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
So we talk about like during the family meetings, it really truly is education so they can make some thoughtful decisions. And so we talk about what do you want to take off your caregiver plate? Because obviously the person who's taking the most care of that person is the one calling out for us to be like, we need help. Let's work with you and invest in an aging plan. And so we'll talk about what do you want to take off your caregiver plate? Maybe you don't like cooking meals because dad needs a special diet or he's a picky eater or you never liked your dad in the first place and now you're having to bathe him, right? Because
Hmm.
that happens too. They're like,
Hmm.
why should I take time off work when dad was always a jerk to me? So there's all that family dynamics. And so, what do you want to take off your caregiver plate that maybe someone else in the family can step in and be like, you know what? I got that because I can order meals to be delivered. So, boom, we
Right.
can take that off the stress list. Maybe it's, look, I burned up all my vacation days. I can't keep taking more time off because dad has 7 more doctor's appointments in the next 6 months. So, what systems can we put in place, or do we have to hire someone like a care manager to step in and coordinate doctor's appointments and get them to their appointments and oversee their medication and their care? But are you going to be willing to pay for that? Because that's not free either.
Hmm.
So that's why those family meetings take a bit of time, but there's so many nuances that we have to cover in those family meetings so that we can build out what are the home care options, what can they afford, who
Right.
in home care is actually taking on new patients, and what's the plan if they can't stay at home because they can't afford 30 to $60,000 per month in 24/7 companion care because dad needs a caregiver, mom needs a caregiver, and that's 60 grand right there or
Hmm.
more. And then you
Hmm.
need the geriatric care manager because the kids can't keep stepping away from their jobs during the day to call the doctor's office to get the pharmacy medication switched out. It's a full-time job when you have
Yep.
just one aging parent, let alone two. And it's even if you live across the street from them, that doesn't make it that makes it easier in some ways because you don't have the airfare to have to deal with. But then you're the one that's going over at 3 o'clock in the morning because dad fell and mom can't get him up off the floor, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's all these things that happen and it gets overwhelming very, very quickly. I don't care
Right.
if you're rich, you're poor. The problem is that things will get out of control very quickly. And if you don't know what to do, then you're going to make really bad, expensive
Hmm.
mistakes.
Yep. Yep. And on that note, whether we're rich or poor, let's talk a little bit about the work you do on the financial side, because as I mentioned, you're co-founder of this group called Plan for Life, and you teach financial advisors ultimately, how to do this proper elder planning. And sort of there's two components are one, obviously we need to financially plan for mom and dad, and also I mean I guess things like elder fraud and things like that
Hmm.
come into play, very important themes that we probably don't hear as much about. But then there's this other component, and this we talked about on previous shows, and again I want to bring it up because it's extremely important and love to get your feedback on it. The current unpaid caregiver phenomena for us sitting here, these us invisible patients, the
Yep.
current AARP numbers about $800 billion
Hmm.
every year. That okay, that's a lot of job that is not
Yep.
being paid for.
Yeah.
Talk about that side of it as well, because it's more than again just planning that mom and dad have a place to be. There's a lot more there.
It's a huge aspect,
Yeah.
Um, That's why we talk about the financial toll on family caregivers. We've got sons or daughters or spouses taking early retirement because they're like, well, my husband just got diagnosed with cancer or my
Yep.
dad has dementia because they don't know about an aging plan. So they're like, I guess I don't have any other option but to quit my job or not take that job promotion for my dream job that I worked my entire career to try to land that job. And now it's been presented to me as an option. But my dad has dementia and my wife's parents this is what it's like, both sets of parents have health issues. And so that employee caregiver is like, I I got my hands full already in my personal life. I can't take this job promotion. And so there's financial tolls all the way around. Most of my adult kids are supplementing their parents' care financially because they didn't have the 5-year financial requirement to pay private pay to get into certain care facilities because maybe
Hmm.
mom and dad are living on Social Security and
Right.
Social Security and a VA benefit, right? That's not going to cut it. These care
Yep.
facilities are 10, 15, 20 grand a month.
Yep.
So so a lot of my adult kids, they're like, they're not contributing as much as they could be or should be to their own retirement accounts, or they're taking so much time off work with their job that now their job is sacrificed, or they've burned through all of their PTO, their paid time off and their FMLA, or
Yep.
they haven't taken vacations for years because every time they try to go on that cruise, this parent falls, or that one has a UTI and now they're in the hospital, or this one had a stroke. And so that financial cost is really expensive. And then every time you've got those rescue missions, because you got to get to Arizona from New York, and that airfare is not $69 on Frontier. Like I
Nope.
said, someone in the family that I'm working with is shelling out at least 15 grand in a year. And that's just travel. That's not like, well, I don't get along with my parents enough to stay with them at their house, and I don't want to drive their car, or their house smells like a nursing home. I want to stay at a hotel. So there's all these extra costs that families are in, that they're taking in on their own, and that adds to some of that resentment too. Because if you're like siblings, why aren't you pitching in some way? If you can't help, then financially contribute. And maybe they can't because they lost their job, right? And so that physical toll is just that everything is like a snowball effect. The emotional toll, the physical toll, the financial toll of caregiving. That's why we need to talk about this, not only as consumers and families, but that's also why I train financial advisors who are coachable. That's the key word.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
train financial planners who are coachable. I started training advisors way back in 2011 when I first started Care Right, because I'm like, okay, I have 6 months of savings. I better figure out how to be a business owner. Otherwise, I'm going to be looking for another nursing home job, right? And I was like, I'm not going back to that. And so I started partnering, or not partnering, but I started sponsoring the Wisconsin Financial Planners Association, the Wisconsin FPA, because I'm like, oh, I should probably work with financial planners because they're working with people with an intellect, a mindset of planning, hiring someone to put a financial plan in place and paying them for it. It's just that when I first started interacting and coaching and training advisors, they're like, Annalee, none of our clients have dementia. None of our clients are family caregivers. None of our clients are going to need nursing home care. All these things you keep talking about don't affect our clients. And I'm like, wow, you are so out of touch with reality. And so it's not been until like really the last 4 or 5 years that the financial services industry is starting to wake up and say, huh, our clients are aging. They're starting to ask us about, dad got diagnosed with dementia. What's that going to mean? And they're like, I have no idea. Or I was talking to a financial advisor today who's been an advisor for 30 some years. And he didn't know the difference between assisted living and memory care. They don't know how much care actually costs. Like I've yet to run into a financial advisor who actually knows that staying at home can cost 30 to $60,000 per month. And
Hmm.
they're like, "What?" And I'm like, so the industry unfortunately isn't required to learn about the human side of financial planning. So that's why I started my other company specifically to train coachable advisors who want to make that relationship more sticky and add more value to that client experience, but also so they can actually put an ethical financial plan in place because now that they understand how much care actually costs, most of them are budgeting 5,800 a month for 24/7 live-in care. Well,
Hmm.
that's a lot different than 30,000, right? So at
Right.
some point, those clients are going to come back and say, gosh, financial advisor, how could you have been so far off the mark with how much care costs? So I'm trying
Hmm.
to save them from getting sued, but also to help them
Right.
build that even stickier relationship with their clients so that they can start using a collaborative approach and not ignore the needs of their aging book of business. And I have to say, I'm like so proud of the industry because truly in the last 4 or 5 years, they've really woke up and said, hey, this is something that we have to learn about, even though it's really uncomfortable. We
Right.
have to start addressing this. So now now they kind of come out of the woodwork to work with me on either training or just direct work with their clients because they're like, I don't need any more initials behind my name. I don't want to go through a 12-week class, because it's time intensive. And so they're like, I don't want to do all that. Can't we just direct refer our clients to you? And I'm like, of course, because then that's just easier. And then they join in the whole process, and then they can adjust the financial plan because they usually have to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's really awesome. It really, a very, again, a very important piece of sort of the challenges here that we probably don't talk as much about, but I'm glad we're, bringing all these to the fore in this discussion today.
Hmm.
And I want to, you know, innovation, technology are very important themes for our show. And I use I tell a story sometimes when we do some of these episodes. My father-in-law and my father, both died of prostate cancer about 40 years apart. And while the obviously the therapeutic component, sort of there was nothing available for my dad in the 1980s, but my father-in-law had some amazing drugs and antibodies and all
Hmm.
the cool sort of cutting edge biotech stuff. But ultimately, when we got to the end of life, when sort of the progression free survival ended, and things went downhill, the technologies were the exact same. I mean, sort of the
Hmm.
palliative care and the hospice care and all that, exactly the same in 2025 as it was back in 1986. From your perspective, and some of the things you look at, and whether that's age tech or
Hmm.
any of these other, I don't know what you want to call it, the end of life care tech.
Yep.
What are you excited about? What types of things do you recommend for families that may have some other resources in terms of, and it doesn't mean wiring up mom and dad with every wearable possible, but where are we going with regards to innovation and tech? Take us down that
Oh,
path. What excites you?
thankfully, so I've been in long-term care and doing aging planning or crisis planning and stuff for 30 years. And, it just every year, the last several years especially, I think it's an exciting time for healthcare if healthcare and senior care will embrace technology. It- that's the
Okay.
question. And
Okay.
if consumers will embrace technology. So when families say, because here's how this all goes down. So my clients, the whole family. So I'll say, okay, mom, and they're all on Zoom with me, and that way I can get everybody's input. And I'm like, okay, mom and dad, Ethel and Marvin, what are your goals as you age? It's always the same two things every single time. I want to age in place at home, and I don't want
Yep.
to be a burden on my kids.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, cool. That's what every person says. And when I ask the adult kids, what are your goals for your parents? It is always the same four things. I want them to be safe is always number one because that's their biggest worry is, are my parents safe? Are they happy? And they want them to have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. The only way that that can be accomplished, all of those goals met, is if we put a plan together. So what families don't always realize, and that's why it's so exciting to see like the light bulb come on with the families, is I'm like, hey, that's great if you want to age in place at home. They're going to need a human body to take care of your parents because
Right.
a robot, at this point isn't going to help you with your shower and take your
Yep.
meds and all this kind of stuff. But technology wise, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over laryngitis. So
That's all right.
technology wise, so you can edit that out if you need to. So technology wise, there's simple things that you can do just, and they're not even robust. You don't have to be super techy. Like even just putting a camera in the house, like
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
common areas, so that if you do call your dad on your lunch break and he doesn't answer, you don't have to be like, oh my God, is he on the floor? What happened? So you can like literally log in on the camera on your phone, the app, and be like, oh, okay, he's sitting there watching TV. He must not have heard his phone, right? So just even a basic camera. The downside of that is that means that the parents have to be willing and your siblings have to be
Right.
willing to say, oh, yeah, because, some people are like, no, that's a total violation of privacy, blah, blah, blah. We're not putting these in the bathrooms and in their bedrooms necessarily. It's just, if you want to make sure that you can just peek in and check on your parents to make sure they're okay, this is an easy way to do it. Cameras are all pretty much all the same anymore. There's different, door alarm sensors and window sensors. If you're
Mm-hmm.
concerned about, like, maybe your parents used to live in a good area, but now it's not as safe as it used to be. And you're like, I don't know, they can't afford to move. What do we do? At least there's like alarms, a security system you can put in. And also if they're wanderers,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that helps with a camera too, because you're like, I don't know, dad didn't answer the phone. Did he wander out? So at least you can check the inside and the outside cameras.
Got
Cameras are also beneficial if you're having home care or anybody coming in another house, even like housekeepers. If there if there's a camera, it tends to keep most people a little bit more honest, right?
it.
And so there's that. There's sensors. So like if mom and dad have incontinence, you can get sensors for their underwear so that it'll beep if they have an accident in their pants. So they're not sitting there for 3 hours with soiled bottoms.
Yep.
There's sensors and GPS sensors that we can put in that can be put into like the soles of their shoes. There's eye tags, Apple tags, so that you can put it in there on their keychain, on their purse, all that kind of stuff. There's GPS for the car. We
Mm-hmm.
talk to our clients about Life 360, and no money changes hands. I'm not like an affiliate. These are just real life practical things.
Mm-hmm.
Most things are free, but like Life 360 has a free app, or it's a free, there's a free account that you can get so that like we have that on my dad. So if I'm like, gosh, dad was supposed to be home at 4 and it's 5, where is he? This
Right.
way I can just like check to see where he is. Most parents have that on their kids, but I encourage that we do that with our aging parents too, whether they have dementia or not. And if they have dementia and are getting lost, they absolutely should not be driving anymore. Um, but then we also have like fall safety. A lot of people have like the Fall Watch or the Apple Watch that can monitor blood pressure, sleep, oxygen, GPS, so that if they do get lost, you can like look them up and be like, where are they? And so there's that type of wearable technology. um, there's also there's some new, I mean, it's not totally new because actually University of Michigan came up with this decades ago, but like falls through the walls where you can see like through the wall if
Mm-hmm.
body images like, okay, well, it looks like mom is on the floor. So those are really good technologies, and it's come a long way since obviously 20 years ago. And we're just going to, every every day there's something more and more. There's even companies that have a virtual caregiver that can remind them to take their medications, that can like, talk through them. Alexa can be leveraged better than what most people do if they're comfortable with an Alexa, because Alexa can remind you can program Alexa, mom, take your pills, mom, take your
Mm-hmm.
pills, it's noon, take your pills. You can, there's so much that we can leverage that doesn't really cost money that could help potentially offset the cost of a companion being there.
Yep.
But when the time comes that we're talking safety, like if mom has confusion and she's got her days and nights mixed up or she's not eating well, a robot's not gonna, like, none of these wearables are gonna help with that.
Right.
So
Right.
you're still gonna need to pay for a person because they still need to have the actual socialization and engagement with someone else. If they don't have engagement, whether it's through technology, they even Facebook or, other types of apps like that, just to keep them engaged with the world outside. But with technology like that, you also have to be careful because what if they get scammed? What if they open an email or an email or a text message that is a scam and now their accounts are compromised, all that kind of stuff. So to offset that problem, because that happens a lot, is they click on things and they don't know, and these scammers are like, just I don't know why they don't use their skill set for good. So
Right.
how to financially protect your vulnerable adults. These are some ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can freeze their credit so that no one can
Okay.
take a credit card out. You can
Yep.
limit, like if they have a credit card, you can limit the available funds so that if they're going to get scammed, it's better to be scammed out of $200 versus 20,000.
Yep.
I also encourage you to start having these conversations about, hey, mom, let's just, I heard this podcast and it made me worried about, let's make sure that your accounts are secure. Let's make sure you have spyware or malware or whatever on your laptop. Let's just double check your accounts to make sure there's no funny business going on, that somehow maybe someone got a hold of your account number. So just having more loving conversations about let's make sure you're safe. All these scammers out there, they're smart. Let's just make sure you're okay. And being on that account, if you're that financial power of attorney, so that you can log in and be like, oh, I don't know, what was this $1,500 charge for?
Right.
That kind of thing. So there are safeguards that families can do, whether you live nearby or not. So
Yep.
there's financial safeguards. There's also, the technology safeguards as well. Um, but but we still can't get away with not having a person there when they need to be toileted, bathed, or
Right.
dressed or groomed.
Right. It's all very interesting. One of the things I want to throw into that basket, but as we're advising the audience, interestingly, just about a year and a half ago or so, one of the guests I had on the show was Susan Forensic, who is she's assistant director of weapons of mass destruction down at the FBI. But one
Oh,
thing that we
wow.
talked about during her career was all the scams and different things
Hmm.
that the FBI had to look in. And the whole area was kind of interesting because we hear a lot about loneliness, of
Hmm.
course, with the elderly, and the amount of scams that pick up to sort of during when Valentine's comes around, and you have an
Yeah.
elder person in your family that may have lost a loved one, and they want connection, they want love, and maybe they don't live near you and all that, and it just rang a bell that just
Hmm.
I can help advise the audience that that's probably a period of time also should be on the lookout for strange charges or
For
things
sure.
like
And,
that.
every day there's something new as a scam.
Yeah.
My dad, so my mom, well, maybe if there's time, we'll get into that. But my dad lives with me now in the winter because my mom passed away. She was served the wrong diet in the memory care facility and she choked to death. And so that's a whole nother podcast about that.
Yeah.
Like what happens in these senior care facilities, even with your best efforts at being there every day. Just terrible things happen to these seniors, and you just simply can't be there every day. But my dad, lives with me in the winter months, and I was on a phone call, and he doesn't always wear his hearing aids, and so the first thing he always does when he get a phone call is he puts it on speakerphone, so like everyone can hear what's happening on the phone, which is a good thing because he's like starting to give out personal information because I can hear what's going on both ends, right? And they're like, "Oh, you just had your knee done a few years ago, and there's a recall on this hip or on this knee, whatever." Knee socket or whatever, and we just want to follow up and get some information from you to make sure that you're okay because there's a class action lawsuit and we just need,
Yeah.
your address and your, all this kind of stuff. And he's 88, so he's of that generation where you just trust,
Right.
where they can because they could back then. And so I'm like on a Zoom call and I'm like, you know what, you guys, I need to like just give me 5 seconds because I'm like, Dad, stop. Because next up was like your bank account information. I'm like, Dad, just hang
Yeah.
up. This is a scam call. And so one thing I want to caution listeners too is because it's easy to get sick, it's easy to be that victim of a scam. You don't have to be 80 years old and vulnerable. Like
Sure.
they're just smart people. And so one thing I can share with you that I don't know if adult kids realize, but there's this app called Nextdoor, which is, for
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
recommendations. Where do you like to eat? I need a
Yep.
handyman. Who do you guys use? But I can tell you every single day, and now granted, I live in Southwest Florida, so there's a lot of seniors here, but I can tell you every single day, if I'm even on that app for 10 minutes, there's at least 15 seniors on there saying, "Hey, I got this letter from like the DOT that I went past this toll and now they need $22 by like 6 o'clock tonight," and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So it's full, like full of seniors like taking they're techie people. They're taking a picture of the letter that they received and they're like, "Hey, is this a scam or is this legit?" Like, because this
Right.
is how easy it is to get scammed. Or they're getting invoices from fake hospitals or clinics and saying
Yep.
you owe 3,000 because your insurance didn't pay it. And so there's all these ways. So adult kids, you have to like lovingly step in and again leverage this podcast and say, no, Ira and Annalee were talking about like a whole bunch of stuff that freaked us out. And so we want to just make sure that you're okay and that you don't get scammed. And that's how you can broach those topics.
Right. Right. all very important. And
I do
you know
want to
the
say, because I do want to say too, because a lot of people might be listening and saying, okay, this is all great about this aging planning thing that you keep saying, but I see the value in it because I'm the adult kid and I'm the one that's already burned through all my vacation days and haven't had a vacate like an actual vacation for 2 years. And I'm the one that does all the work and my brother and sister don't do anything. And, so you might be kind of going through all this in your head. So you might be like, okay, well, great. It makes perfect sense to put a plan in place, but how do I get mom and dad on board? And so
right,
here are some pointers on that. So
please.
you can have a loving conversation with your mom or dad if they aren't in the deep throes of dementia, right? You can't you
Sure.
can't talk to
Right.
someone who's already sundowning and wandering and doesn't, not able to like retain information, but you can talk to your healthy, cognizant parent and say, again, leverage this podcast. We listened to this about this podcast on aging and just kind of what's coming down the pike. And it's really important that we start having some conversations and figure out what are we going to do? Like, what are your goals as you age? What do you have for money? Do you have long-term care insurance? Is dad a veteran? Like at least start the framework of some of these questions. And you're only going to be able to get so far because of family dynamics and your knowledge is going
Mm-hmm.
to restrict you because you can't put a plan in place if you don't know that dementia is not the same as, some other
Right.
disease. And so
Right.
so you can say, mom, is it important for you? Ask questions they can't really say no to. And I know that sounds really icky, but this is how you get it.
Right.
Mom, is it important for you to have as much say in what happens to you and where you live as you age? If, because who's going to say no to that? Do you want to have as much say as possible on all these what whens of aging? Do you want to do you want to have the most independent and dignified aging years? Because
Mm-hmm.
again, who's going to say no to that? Mom, what are your goals? I promise you, she'll say, I want to age in place at home and I don't want to be a burden on my kids. Then that's how you can step in and say, I don't want you to ever worry about feeling like that. So let's start working with, you know, hopefully me or someone that you know and trust that does aging planning, and let's start these conversations now so that we can build out a plan so that if or when your care needs increase, they will, but nobody wants to hear about when they can't take themselves to the bathroom anymore.
Right.
And so, when you start needing more care, or if you start needing more care, we already know what the landscape of care is available for you in your area and how much it's going to cost and how are we going to pay for this. If she's living on Social Security, that's not going to cut it's not going to cut it
Right.
for paying for care. So it's better to find all this financial stuff out now, and then we can reverse engineer and be like, okay, well, if mom and dad only have 200,000 plus a house, they're not going to be able
Mm-hmm.
to age in place at home.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's just a fact. And so your options are based on what you can afford. And so, we need to put a strategy in place, but we also know that, to get into most of these senior care homes, you have to have a certain amount of net worth or be able to pay privately for 2 or 3 years. So we need to figure all that out, that strategy out now instead of at the 11th hour, because then they'll end up in whichever facility has an open bed, and I promise you
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to be a good fit.
Got it. All
And if
excellent
and if
points.
parents are going to have to leave their house, it's better to do it um, under a more positive experience than waiting until they have a medical issue and then the decision is taken away, right? Because then
Mm-hmm.
they will end up in whatever place has an open bed. But if we can get the ball rolling now and determine which care communities to do the tours that they can afford to stay in and not have to move out when they run out of money, as an example, begin with the end in mind, right? And
Right.
so if we can start that process now, get them on the waiting list. Some of these places have a 2 to 3 to 5 year waiting list, or they have 40 people on the waiting list because every day that you didn't plan, someone else did. And so
Yeah.
so we need to just be adults about all of this, and it's not comfortable, but that's why there's those of us that this is what we do and this is why we do it, so people have better outcomes.
Yep. Yep. Ellie, what else is coming up for you, whether it's Care Right, Plan for Life, the other initiatives that you have going on? I mean, I know you're traveling a lot and doing a lot of presentations. And then also just while we're here, I mean, I'm here, I'm sitting here in Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. is down that way about an hour and a half. a lot going on, a lot going on in that town the
Yes.
last couple of months, and whether it's NIA or the the Administration of Community Living, a lot of different agencies down there
Yeah.
involved in aging, caregiving, dementia care, and so forth. What do you see, and what do you hope to see coming out of the administration,
What
specifically in?
I'm what I'm hoping to see, what I'm hoping to see is better quality care provided in these care homes. The problem is that we have a massive shortage of healthcare workers, even they're leaving the industry in droves. And so one of the things I would like to see is improved workplace culture for healthcare because if they're treated well, paid properly, and not working double shifts every more often than not, they'll stay because they went into care because they have a heart for it. And we simply can't afford to keep losing good, quality, dedicated, compassionate healthcare workers by the droves. And that's why so many of these facilities, they're cited for abuse and neglect year after year after year. So one thing I would like us to see as a nation is where families and their vulnerable adult loved ones can actually feel safe and secure and trust that the caregivers that are assigned to them in these care facilities or with home care workers are actually properly trained, properly managed, properly supervised, and held accountable for their care delivery. So that's number one. Number two is the if there was some way magic wand to even with the reason one of the reasons that we have such a challenge not only for a senior care as you mentioned it throughout the podcast, billions of hours are provided by family caregivers. So if there's a way that employers could better address these caregiver issues with their workforce, then they wouldn't be losing senior employees who are good because they're retiring early because dad had a stroke, right? So if there's a way that the workforce could better provide services, and then also just you know, my biggest beef is we have to protect the family caregiver. We have to protect and safeguard the healthcare workers because robots at this point aren't the ones up and down the halls taking
Yep.
care of people. And so
Yep.
we have to come together as a nation and figure out how are we going to solve this major problem. Every single one of us should be invested in improving senior care because right now it's our parents that are the guinea pigs and at the receiving end of a really bad care. But at some point, it's going to be us. So we
Yep.
all, like you and me and everybody else, we all have a vested interest in working together and trying to figure out solutions to improve the quality of care. I testified at the House Ways and Means Committee during COVID and said, look,
Nice.
this is what's happening to our seniors. They're being neglected, they're being abused. Healthcare workers, they're burned out. They'll go weeks or months without even an executive director or administrator because if you don't have consistent management and leadership, it's the wild, wild west in these care facilities. And our seniors and vulnerable adults and our veterans deserve better. So, one thing I try to do is I just emailed all of the politicians again about this is what's going on state by state. It's not like just one state is troubled with senior care and the quality of care. Like this is a nationwide problem. So about every 6 months or so, I send out a massive email to all of our politicians and say, look, this is the basically the state of the union of senior care, and we need to figure out solutions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Except I need ears that care and ears that are coachable.
Yep.
That's
No,
the challenge.
spot on. Well, you're definitely at the epicenter of it all, and it's again, it's very impressive hearing you talk about it, and um, you know, uh, very important tools that you're outlining for the audience, and I just look forward to seeing how things continue to evolve in the space, and I hope they all go in the direction that you're talking about, despite
I
what's
hope
happening
so.
down in the Beltway. But really, really impressive work, and I really enjoyed this discussion. Again, for everybody out there that's going to be listening to this very important episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Annalee Kruger, the president of CareRight. Also check out Plan for Life, the Aging Strategy Coaching Academy. We'll put all the links in the bio, show notes, and of course, pick up a copy of Annalee's book, The Invisible Patient: The Emotional, Financial, and Physical Toll on Family Caregivers. Annalee, again, I want to thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today, talk about all this very important information you're giving to us. Thank you for what you do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there via what you're
Thank
doing.
you.
Really
I do
appreciate
want to I do want to say one thing about ASCA, the Aging Strategy Coach Academy.
it. Hmm.
Because when you ask, like, where do I want to see senior care going? I want that if there are going to be senior care consultants out there, that they're actually properly trained and know what they're doing. So
Hmm.
that's why I created the Aging Strategy Coach Academy. It is the only global academy that addresses aging, family caregiver burnout, family dynamics, how to facilitate family meetings, end of life, death and dying, senior care, cost of care, how to like everything that I do with Care right?
Yep.
Because the problem is, as a consumer, just know that if you're in this stage of life and you're like, oh, we need to, what are we gonna do? Because things are changing quickly with mom and dad, and we got to figure this out. If for whatever reason I didn't connect with you, or you know if you don't feel like I'm a good fit for you, and you're
Hmm.
trying to find someone who does care consulting and stuff, you just have to be really careful. I'll just caution, because there's a lot of people out there, again, trying to take advantage of seniors, or maybe their heart's in the right place, but they're just not trained. They don't know
Right.
what they're doing. And so they're trying to help families, but because they don't know what they're doing, I can't always undo what these other incompetent people have done. Or there's companies that are called like placement companies, where they'll be like, hey, I have Ethel and Marvin here. They need assisted living. Who has an open bed and who's going to pay me the biggest commission?
Right.
So it's a transaction. We call it the senior auction, because it doesn't matter where they go. They're just looking for that commission, right? But there's
Right.
no caregiving, there's no care advocacy, there's no family meetings. There's no concierge model of, aging. There's no aging planning. It's simply a transaction. You need assisted living. Here you go. Go to this one because I get 30 grand for that referral. So you
Right.
just have to be
Right.
really careful and do a lot of due diligence. Um, and it shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately that is the way it is. So that's why I created those modules for people who want to do senior care consulting, but do it the right way with
Right.
integrity and ethics.
Got it. Got it. Well, we will put the links to all of that, and encourage everybody to check out all of your sites and everything you do. But really a great discussion. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you. I appreciate being your guest again today.
Great having you.